Welcome to another edition of Whisky-ing. I'm Richard Liebrecht, your not that fussy and not all that well informed whiskey guide. Well, you get what you pay for here on YouTube. Tonight I have yet another Canadian whiskey. For those who haven't watched yet, Whisky-ing is all about enjoying Canadian whiskey in rather unpretentious ways. Um, I've got a pretty interesting sample tonight. This one's Bearface 111 series. Uh, Now, I don't know if you can see some of the decor on it, but what makes this one pretty cool is that little logo right there. Focus. Nice. Oaxaca. This is a whiskey, 10 parts Canadian single grain whiskey and 1 part mezcal, with some intriguing and surprisingly Scottish results. Um, so I'm going to tip into that a little bit and also take the opportunity to talk a little bit because, again, this show is all about uh, bringing whiskey to the people. So going to talk a little bit about what the heck makes whiskey smoky. And this is a really interesting example. Well, not I'm blowing the secret here. This thing's got a really interesting way of making a smoky whiskey. So basic stats on the bottle, 42.5% alcohol by volume, so definitely your regular kind of bottling strength. It is aged primarily in new fill French oak, finished in some ex bourbon barrels, and then, like I said, 10 parts of that mixed with 1 part of mezcal to make a kind of international kind of conspiracy here that turns out quite well. Um, have given this a pre-taste. I am drinking this tonight in the usual Glencairn glass. Pour myself a healthy little ounce there. I have pre-tasted this. Don't worry about the shakes. I'm still relatively healthy, man. Uh, I have been shaky since the day I was born, I'm pretty sure. Um, yeah, so have had a pre-sample of this, and definitely intriguing in a largely good way. So I'll get into the notes before we get into the education. Now, so I've given away the secret already. There's a smoky tinge to this, but on the nose, and also you would think, okay, mezcal, that is a very close cousin to tequila. Does this smell like tequila? Thankfully, no. Not to say tequila's lovely once you get some good stuff, but the last thing you want to be doing is smelling some Jose Cuervo up in your Canadian whiskey. You're not smelling that. On the other hand, you are getting a little bit of a vegetal, again, not pretend to show, like a little bit of like artichoke, maybe some asparagus, some green firm vegetable with just a hint of smoke. And let's talk about what the heck makes this whiskey smoky. So, um, prior to picking up this bottle this week, which retailed for around $44, so right off the top, this is a steal of a whiskey. Absolutely recommend getting it just off of that price point. It's hard to get something that's good quality, intriguing for less than $50. And this is in Alberta, Canada, so I don't know what it would be in your local market for a price, but definitely on the lower end of whiskey cost and definitely mid to higher end in terms of result here. So anyway, so what makes this a smoky whiskey? So mezcal, like I said, I have had very little familiarity with it before I picked up this bottle, but got into reading a little bit about it while I was researching this. So short answer is that just like the peated whiskies of Islay over in Scotland, the typical hairy-chested whiskey that some some bro out there is chugging because he is such a man and so sophisticated. Okay, if you like smoky whiskey and legitimately appreciate it, good on you. In fact, this is an interesting one to check out. But it has that reputation, at least in my mind, of being that the uber man. Oh, I'm gonna drink this because it's smoky and smoky things are manly and tough. Um, this that quality to whiskey is something that turns a lot of people off, including myself. No, I'm not a smoky whiskey guy. So how does that come about? Well, for those who don't know the whiskey making process, barley is soaked in water and sprouted. The key here is that barley, a grain, has a whole bunch of starch in it that needs to be converted into sugar, which the yeast can eat to fart out alcohol to then make something you can distill it to make the wonderful whiskey that we enjoy here today. Thank you, yeast. So sprouting it and then stopping that sprouting after a few days is what converts that to sugar without starting to grow little barley plants. The way they've done that, at least historically in Islay, was they would cook this stuff over a peat fire. Peat being the chopped out soil of a bog. God bless the Scots. They really found a way to survive on a barren island because they would burn the ground to keep themselves warm. That smoke imparted itself in the barley, which would migrate through the whiskey, and then you get a smoky whiskey. Okay, so what does this have to do with mezcal? So mezcal, like tequilas, made from, well, they're both agave spirits, I guess is a safe way to put it. So similar, like you imagine this huge plant, maybe up to 40 pounds with big spikes on it. They chop all those leaves off. It's still this massive heart of a plant full of starch. So to convert it to sugar, what they do is they chop this stuff up. They dig a big pit in the ground. They put a bunch of burning wood down there to create that massive heat. They put stones on top. They put all this agave heart on top, cover it, and then cook it for like 3 days. So it's getting like this wood smoke, like intense sealed in wood smoke for like 3 days. It's going to come out smoky as hell, but also quite sweet from all that heat cooking the starch in it and turning it into sugar, which then sets it up to make alcohol, which then makes mezcal. And just like peated whiskey, it carries that smoke through with it. So hence we get a smoky whiskey from Canada, and we don't usually, there's a handful of peated whiskeys, and frankly I don't love peat. It's not wood. It doesn't have a wood burning flavor. It's got like a weird medicinal boggy kind. I don't know, boggy, is that a flavor? I don't know. It has a weird kind of smoky flavor to it, whereas this is like maybe burned over mesquite wood or something local like that. So it's got a nicer like kind of bonfire quality to it, but kind of has that reminiscence of an Islay whiskey. So like I said, the nose, a little bit of that bonfire quality to it, but also like, you know, some vanilla sweetness as well. And there's definitely a little bit of sweetness here. You can tell color-wise, it's got a little bit of a pinkish hue. And then in terms of the legs on it, pretty thin whiskey. Doesn't have that kind of oily texture that some others might. So it's here that you get some really interesting notes. So right away, you get a little bit of a rush of sweetness. This is not like candy sweet. It's not like novelty sweet. It's not they poured some syrup into a whiskey kind of sweet. But and not having drank standalone mezcal, I think, ever, I wonder if there's not some like a sweetness from that spirit coming into this thing. And you've got that legit like bonfire smokiness here. Like it's got a quality like eating like brisket, but again with a little bit of that like asparagus green kind of undertone, because this thing is coming from a big green starchy kind of plant, and it doesn't though have the same iodine like cough syrupy quality that peat smoke does. So I actually enjoy this a lot better. Now, the other thing you can tell though is there's still that layer of Canadian whiskey in it, which is giving me definitely a vanilla tone, like very typical, like kind of aged wood. Maybe I don't taste the corn of the bourbon, but maybe that's contributing some of the sweetness. Maybe not the mezcal, but you know, a generically like pleasing, subtle Canadian whiskey flavor underneath it. So it's like a little bit of burnt wood, a little bit of unburnt wood going into this flavor wise. And that sweetness carries through the palate. So that middle, like I'm rolling it across the tongue, tasting it. I've got a little sweet, little smoke. As I roll that off the back of my tongue, so the finish, I'm getting that. Then it's really more truly bonfire. Like I can get a little bit of an ashiness on the back end, and then the sweetness drops away right away, and you're left with more of a spiciness. Like it almost makes you think reminiscent of rye whiskey. I don't think this is rye. It doesn't have that level of spiciness, but kind of dry, peppery, maybe even a little bit of like tannins on there. A little, you want to pucker your tongue a little bit. Um, yeah. So what an interesting number here. Um, I mean, overall, I don't put this as my number one or number two whiskey on my shelf. I think it's a little bit strange for that. And it's the smoky thing. Again, being a guy who doesn't love a smoky whiskey, maybe this is still just too much smoke for me, and I just want to go back to the gentle cuddle of my good old, straight Canadian whiskey. But I would absolutely keep this as that third bottle on the shelf. That thing that you pull out on occasion. Maybe you're two drinks deep with some friends and you want to show them something completely different. Or better yet, you've got that hairy chested Chad that's coming over who's like, oh, I live whatever. But you have hope for him still, that he could still be a refined whiskey drinker. Again, all jokes here. But seriously, someone who's interested in a smokier whiskey, show them this and say, hey, I've got some you might like, but it's a little different. It's going to blow some people's minds. It is that kind of thing to have. I put it above novelty. Like I do enjoy. I've had when I first cracked this bottle open, I had 2 or 3 ounces that night, and didn't hate myself for it. It didn't like leave my mouth overwhelmed with smoke, but yeah, if you're looking for a standard like, I'm gonna chill and have an easygoing whiskey, it's not quite that. Um, and I don't do ratings on this show other than to say, like, I'd recommend buying it. That's what I'd recommend buying it as, especially for the price point. Like, you'd be silly not to have this as a bottle on your shelf, either for that occasion, to impress some friends, or whatever. If you like smoky stuff, this is worth having. Mm. So friggin' interesting. Um, Great one to have. So again, Bearface 111 series, limited release if you can get your hands on it. I understand from the distillery it's only available in Alberta, BC, and Ontario, but who knows where you can get it these days. Check them out, and we'll see you soon for another edition of Whiskey. Have a good one.